The wind stirred through the pines with an ancient whisper as Eleanor Silverwood turned the key in the lock of a home that was hers by inheritance, but foreign in every other sense. The wooden door creaked open, revealing dust motes dancing in the afternoon light that spilled through windows neglected for nearly a decade. 58 years of life in Chicago's bustling metropolis had not prepared her for the profound silence of Whisper Ridge, a settlement so small it barely qualified as a village on the remote Canadian-American border. Winter was settling in early this year. The November air carried the unmistakable promise of snow, crisp and clean, in a way Eleanor had forgotten existed. Her breath formed small clouds as she stood on the threshold, one foot in her past, one in whatever uncertain future awaited. 3 months since Robert's funeral. 35 years of marriage concluded with a heart that simply stopped beating one ordinary Tuesday morning. "This is it, then," Eleanor whispered to herself, a habit formed in the endless silent days following Robert's death. Her voice sounded different here, as if the mountains themselves absorbed its city-hardened edges. The cabin had belonged to her grandmother, Evelyn Silverwood, a woman who had lived here alone for almost 40 years after Eleanor's grandfather passed. A woman who, like Eleanor, had found herself a widow far earlier than anyone should. The symmetry wasn't lost on her as she wheeled her single suitcase across the threshold. Eleanor had visited as a child during summer breaks, but those memories had faded to watercolor impressions, the smell of pine, the coolness of the nearby stream, her grandmother's strange habit of speaking to the trees as if they were old friends. Her retirement from the Chicago Tribune had coincided with Robert's death, with an irony that still stung. 30 years as an editor, shaping other people's stories, while her own suddenly veered into territory for which she had no map. The cabin, bequeathed to her years ago, had seemed like the answer to a question she hadn't known to ask. What does one do when the life one has built collapses? Where does one go when there is nowhere left? The answer, apparently, was Whisper Ridge. Eleanor spent that first afternoon opening windows, shaking out dust covers, and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The cabin was sturdy but basic, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen with appliances at least 20 years out of date, a bedroom with a view of endless forest, and a cramped bathroom that had been modernized at some point in the 90s. Electricity worked, the phone line was connected, but internet service would be spotty at best. As twilight approached, Eleanor found herself drawn to her grandmother's old desk, positioned by a window overlooking the tree line. The worn oak surface held memories of watching Evelyn write in journals by lamplight. On impulse, she pulled open the largest drawer. It stuck slightly, then revealed a leather-bound book, its spine cracked with age and use. The first page bore her grandmother's distinctive handwriting, the date marking it 40 years old. June 3, 1985. The council met again tonight. The signs are becoming impossible to ignore. The balance shifts, and though they speak of decades, I fear we may not have so much time. Thornton insists we need a new listener before winter. I told him what I've always told him, that gift cannot be taught or transferred. It must be born. The bloodline thins with each generation. My Eleanor showed promise as a child, but the city has muted whatever sensitivity she might have inherited. Perhaps her children, if she has them. Perhaps their children. Meanwhile, I listen as best I can, though the voices grow fainter to me now. Eleanor frowned, turning the page. More entries followed, references to the listeners, the Forest Council, and something called the Nexus. Her grandmother had always been eccentric, but this read like fantasy. She closed the journal with a sigh, attributing it to the isolation of rural life, or perhaps the early onset of the dementia that had claimed Evelyn in her final years. Night had fallen completely by the time Eleanor finished unpacking. The darkness here was different, absolute in a way city dwellers never experienced. She lit a fire in the old stone hearth, the techniques her grandfather had taught her returning like muscle memory. As flames caught and grew, she settled into a worn armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, and let exhaustion wash over her. That first night, Eleanor dreamt of wolves. Morning brought a tentative knock at her door. Eleanor, still in her robe and halfway through her first cup of coffee, opened it to find a woman approximately her age with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a practical bun. "I'm Sarah Dawson from the general store," the woman announced with the forced brightness of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "Thought I should welcome you to Whisper Ridge. You're Evelyn's granddaughter, aren't you? The newspaper lady from Chicago?" Eleanor nodded, surprised. "News travels fast." "Small town," Sarah shrugged. "We don't get newcomers often, especially not in winter, especially not to the old Silverwood place." There was something in the way she emphasized Silverwood that made Eleanor pause. "Is there something wrong with this cabin?" "Wrong? No, nothing wrong." Sarah's smile tightened. Well, your grandmother was a bit of a character around here, kept to herself mostly, had some peculiar ideas about the forest." "She was eccentric," Eleanor acknowledged. "That's one word for it." Sarah glanced over her shoulder at the tree line, then thrust a basket into Eleanor's hands. "Anyway, I brought some essentials: fresh bread, preserves, coffee. The good kind, not the sawdust we sell to tourists. Stores open 8 to 5 most days if you need anything else." "That's very kind." "Word of advice," Sarah interrupted, already backing away. "The trails around here can be treacherous even in good weather. Best stick close to town until you get your bearings. And," she hesitated, "some folks say the woods get strange after dark. Probably just old superstition, but no harm in being cautious." Before Eleanor could question this cryptic warning, Sarah had turned and was hurrying back toward her truck. Over the next week, Eleanor established a routine. Mornings were spent organizing the cabin, afternoons exploring the immediate surroundings, evenings reading by the fire. She met a handful of villagers, all of whom displayed the same contradictory behavior, polite welcome overlaid with subtle wariness. They asked about Chicago, about her work at the newspaper, about her plans for the cabin. No one mentioned her grandmother beyond perfunctory acknowledgments of relation. No one mentioned the forest. It was during her second week that Eleanor first noticed the whispering. She had ventured a little further than usual, following a well-worn path that wound alongside a narrow stream. The day was clear, but cold, the ground hardened with frost that crunched beneath her boots. The sun had begun its early winter descent when she paused to rest on a fallen log. That's when she heard it, a sound like voices carried on the wind, too distant to make out words but distinctly human in cadence. Eleanor stood, turning slowly. "Hello? Is someone there?" No response came, yet the whispers continued, seeming to shift direction with the breeze. Unsettled, she started back toward the cabin, the sensation of being watched prickling between her shoulder blades. The whispers followed, rising and falling like conversation just beyond the threshold of comprehension. By the time she reached the cabin, Eleanor had convinced herself it was simply the wind through the pine needles, her city ears unaccustomed to forest acoustics. Yet that night, as she leafed through more of her grandmother's journals, certain passages stood out with new significance. October 12th, 1986. The whispers are stronger near the old stone circle. I spent 3 hours today, simply listening. The elders speak of danger coming, though not in our lifetime. They remember longer than we do, see further. What troubles them most is who will listen when I no longer can. The gift must be passed on, but how? To whom? Eleanor closed the journal, disturbed by the parallel. Coincidence, she told herself. The power of suggestion. She was a rational woman who had spent her career fact-checking other people's flights of fancy. This was simply loneliness and grief playing tricks on her mind. Yet the whispers came again the next day, and the next, always when she was alone in the forest, always just beyond understanding. On her third Sunday in Whisper Ridge, Eleanor decided to visit the small local diner for breakfast, craving both human interaction and food she hadn't prepared herself. The Bell and Whistle was housed in a converted railway car, its windows steamed from the heat inside. As she entered, conversation dimmed momentarily before resuming with forced normality. Eleanor took a seat at the counter, nodding politely to the elderly man next to her, who was focused intently on his pancakes. The waitress, a woman in her 30s with a name tag reading Jenny, approached with coffee. "You're the Silverwood woman," Jenny stated while pouring. Staying in Evelyn's old place? Eleanor, she offered with a smile. And yes, I've inherited my grandmother's cabin. Passing through or settling in? Settling, I think. I've recently retired. Jenny nodded, as if this confirmed something. Breakfast special's good today. Blueberry pancakes, local syrup. That sounds perfect. As Jenny moved away, the man beside Eleanor cleared his throat. He was perhaps in his mid-60s, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his life outdoors, silver hair cut military short, and startlingly clear blue eyes. James Harrison, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Retired Army colonel. Live about a mile down from your place. Eleanor shook his hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. Eleanor Silverwood, retired newspaper editor. Chicago Tribune, he nodded. I read your coverage of the Lakeside corruption scandal back in 12. Good work. Surprised and somewhat flattered, Eleanor smiled genuinely for what felt like the first time in months. You follow Chicago politics from all the way up here? I follow good journalism wherever I find it. James sipped his coffee. Been out exploring yet? A little. Just around the cabin, really. Beautiful country, he commented. But easy to get turned around if you don't know it. The forest changes in winter. There was something in his tone that made Eleanor think of Sarah's warning, of the whispers. Changes how? James considered her for a long moment, as if deciding something important. Tell you what, I lead hiking groups in the summer. Know these woods better than most. If you'd like a proper tour sometime, keep you from wandering where you shouldn't, I'd be happy to oblige. Before Eleanor could respond, the diner's door swung open with a blast of cold air. A tall man in his 70s entered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat that spoke of wealth. His silver hair was styled perfectly, his bearing aristocratic, but it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark and penetrating beneath heavy brows. He was accompanied by a younger man in a suit who carried a leather portfolio. The diner fell silent. James stiffened beside her. Conrad Blackwood, he muttered under his breath. Speak of the devil. Who is he? Eleanor whispered back. CEO of North Star Resources, mining and timber mostly. Been trying to expand operations into the Whispering Pines forest for years. Blackwood surveyed the diner with the casual ownership of someone accustomed to deference. His gaze paused briefly on Eleanor, a flicker of interest crossing his features before he proceeded to a booth in the corner. He doesn't seem very popular, Eleanor observed as conversation slowly resumed. James snorted. That's putting it mildly. Man thinks he can buy anything, including opinions. Been purchasing land all around the ridge. Rumor has it he's close to getting federal approval for his newest project. What kind of project? The kind that leaves holes in mountains and clear-cuts forests. James's voice had hardened. Officially, it's about jobs and resources. Unofficially, he trailed off, then drained his coffee cup. Let's just say there's more to those woods than timber. Jenny arrived with Eleanor's pancakes, effectively ending the conversation. James excused himself shortly after, leaving his card with a handwritten address on the back. That tour offer stands, he said. Might be good to know what you're living next to. Eleanor tucked the card into her pocket, intrigued despite herself. She was finishing her meal when Conrad Blackwood approached her table. Up close, he was even more imposing. Tall and still powerfully built despite his age, with the confident posture of a man unaccustomed to obstacles. Ms. Silverwood, he greeted her, his voice a cultivated baritone. Conrad Blackwood, I hope you'll forgive the interruption, but news travels quickly in small communities. I understand you're Evelyn Silverwood's granddaughter. Eleanor nodded cautiously. I am. I knew your grandmother briefly, a remarkable woman with unique perspectives. He smiled, revealing perfect teeth. I'd been meaning to reach out. Your property borders land that's of particular interest to my company. Perhaps we could discuss it sometime. I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Blackwood. His smile didn't falter. I haven't made an offer yet. When you do, my answer will be the same. Blackwood studied her for a moment, then chuckled. You have Evelyn's directness. I admired that about her. He produced a business card, placing it beside her plate. My number, should you reconsider. The cabin is quite isolated for someone accustomed to city living, especially as winter sets in. With a slight nod, he returned to his booth, leaving Eleanor with a vague sense of having been assessed and catalogued. That night brought the first significant snowfall of the season. Eleanor sat by the fire, reading more of her grandmother's journals, increasingly disturbed by the parallels between Evelyn's writings and her own experiences. The whispers in the forest, the villagers' strange behavior, and now Blackwood's interest in the property. A passage from 1992 caught her attention. James believes Blackwood knows about the Nexus. I told him that's impossible. Only a listener can find it, and even then, only under specific conditions. But he's right that the test drillings are getting closer. The elders are restless. The wolves have been seen more frequently near the village. Eleanor frowned. James. Could it be the same James Harrison she'd met today? And wolves? There hadn't been wolves in this region for decades, according to the local information she'd read. A sudden howl pierced the night, so close it seemed to emanate from just beyond her window. Eleanor froze, the journal forgotten in her lap. The sound came again, mournful, ancient, and unmistakably lupine. Moving to the window, she peered into the darkness. The snowfall had intensified, creating a swirling white curtain illuminated only by the cabin's lights. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, a movement at the forest's edge. A large shape, too big to be a dog, its coat dark against the snow. It stood perfectly still, watching the cabin, watching her. Eleanor's heart pounded as she stared back, unable to look away. The creature, the wolf, held her gaze for what seemed an eternity before turning with deliberate slowness and disappearing into the trees. Sleep eluded her that night. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every whistle of wind sounded like voices calling her name. By morning, exhaustion and rationality had reasserted themselves. Wolves were gradually returning to parts of the northern forests. She'd read something about conservation efforts. There was nothing supernatural about a wolf sighting, however unexpected. Yet when she ventured onto the porch to assess the snow, she found large paw prints leading from the forest to her window, then back again. Too large for any ordinary wolf. Eleanor spent the day in town, using the weather as an excuse to visit the local library, a single room attached to the town hall, staffed by a volunteer retiree who seemed surprised to have a visitor. She searched newspaper archives, local history books, anything that might shed light on her grandmother's writings, and the strange atmosphere of Whisper Ridge. Most materials proved disappointingly mundane. Town council minutes, agricultural records, tourist brochures highlighting hiking trails and fishing spots. But in a dusty file labeled Local Folklore, Eleanor discovered a thin, self-published booklet titled The Legends of Whispering Pines. The amateur collection of myths and stories centered around the forest, many attributed to Native American traditions. One entry in particular caught her attention. The Guardians of the Nexus. According to both Algonquin legend and early settler accounts, the Whispering Pines forest contains what was called a nexus, a point where the veil between worlds grows thin. This sacred place was guarded by great spirit wolves and human listeners who could interpret the forest's will. The last documented reference to these listeners comes from the journal of Elizabeth Crawford, who in 1879 described meeting a woman who speaks with trees and runs with wolves near what is now Whisper Ridge. Eleanor photographed the page with her phone, her journalist's instincts fully awakened. The connections were too specific to be coincidental. Her grandmother's journals, the whispers she herself had begun to hear, the wolf at the edge of the forest, Blackwood's interest in the land. She was so absorbed in her research that she barely noticed the library had grown dark until the elderly volunteer gently informed her they were closing. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the temperature had plummeted, transforming the village into a treacherous landscape of ice and shadow. As Eleanor carefully navigated the slippery sidewalk toward her parked car, a voice called her name. She turned to see James Harrison approaching, bundled in a practical winter coat. "Nasty night to be out," he commented, falling into step beside her. "Car giving you trouble?" "No, I lost track of time at the library." "Research?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided to be direct. I found my grandmother's journals. They mention you. James's stride faltered almost imperceptibly. Do they now? And something called the Nexus, and listeners. She studied his face in the streetlight. You knew her well, didn't you? Better than you let on at the diner. He sighed, his breath forming a cloud between them. This isn't a conversation for the middle of Main Street. My cabin's not far. I could offer you a hot drink, some answers. Eleanor considered the offer. Every instinct cultivated during her journalism career told her there was a story here, one that somehow involved her grandmother, this man, and the strange forest surrounding Whisper Ridge. The rational part of her brain warned about going to a strange man's home, but something deeper, the same instinct that had guided her through decades of interviews and investigations, told her James Harrison was trustworthy. Lead the way, she decided. James's cabin proved to be larger than hers, built of the same sturdy logs, but with modern additions that spoke of comfort rather than luxury. The interior was warm and well lit, decorated with an eclectic mix of military memorabilia, local art, and well-stocked bookshelves. A fire already blazed in a stone hearth similar to Eleanor's. Bourbon? He offered, moving to a cabinet. Please. He poured 2 generous glasses, handed her one, then settled into a leather armchair across from her. So, he said after a contemplative sip, you found Evelyn's journals. Yes, they're unusual. That's one way to put it. James studied her over the rim of his glass. What do you make of them? Initially, I thought they might be symptoms of isolation or early dementia. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Now I'm not so sure. Why's that? She hesitated, feeling foolish despite her conviction. I've been hearing things in the forest, whispers, and last night I saw a wolf outside my cabin, a massive one. James nodded slowly, unsurprised. Black coat? Yellow eyes? Eleanor's breath caught. You've seen it too? That would be Sentinel. At least that's what your grandmother called him. James set his glass down. Evelyn and I worked together for almost 20 years, Eleanor. She was the listener. I was, still am, one of the protectors. What exactly were you protecting? The Nexus. He said it simply, as if it were as ordinary as mentioning the town hall. It's a place of power within the deepest part of the forest, a natural wellspring of energy that maintains the balance of the entire ecosystem. Some might call it magic, though Evelyn preferred concentrated life force. Eleanor fought the urge to dismiss his words as fantasy. She was a practical woman who dealt in facts, who had built a career on verifiable information. Yet the evidence of her own experiences, the whispers, the wolf, the strange atmosphere of Whisper Ridge, lent credence to James's explanation. And these listeners? Rare individuals who can hear the voice of the forest, communicate with its creatures. Your grandmother was one, her mother before her. James fixed her with a meaningful look. The gift runs in bloodlines, though it sometimes skips generations. The implication hung between them. Eleanor shook her head. I'm a newspaper editor from Chicago. I don't talk to trees. And yet you hear whispers in the forest. You saw Sentinel, who shows himself to very few humans. James leaned forward. Evelyn believed the gift would manifest in her descendants when the forest needed it most. And does it? Need it most? James's expression darkened. Blackwood's company has been conducting surveys, soil samples, exploratory drilling. He claims to be searching for rare earth minerals essential for technology, but what he's really after is the Nexus itself. Why would a mining executive be interested in forest energy? Because he's dying. James rose, moving to a desk where he retrieved a file folder. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed 6 months ago. He handed Eleanor several printouts, medical records, internal memos, news clippings. My military connections still provide useful intelligence. Eleanor scanned the documents, her editor's eye quickly assembling the narrative. He believes the Nexus can cure him? The waters of the Nexus are said to have healing properties, yes. but accessing them requires a listener to locate the exact site, and even then, there are rituals, conditions. James reclaimed his seat. Your grandmother refused to help him 15 years ago when he first approached her. Now he's desperate, and he's found research suggesting that the energy point might be accessible through your property. Eleanor thought of Blackwood's interest in her land, his mention of her grandmother. That's why he wants my cabin. It's one of the reasons. James hesitated. There's more. The Nexus isn't just a source of healing, it's a wellspring of immense energy. If accessed improperly or drained beyond sustainable levels, what happens? The forest dies. Everything connected to it dies. The environmental impact would be catastrophic. Imagine a dead zone expanding outward for miles. Eleanor processed this information, her journalist's mind automatically testing it for inconsistencies. If this is true, why haven't you gone public? Environmental groups would what? Fight a legal battle against a billionaire with political connections using evidence of a mystical forest energy source? James shook his head. We've done what we can within conventional channels. Conservation lawsuits, endangered species declarations. But Blackwood has resources we can't match, and time is running out. For the forest, and for him. The conviction in James's voice was compelling. Either he genuinely believed everything he was saying, or he was the most skilled liar Eleanor had ever encountered, and she'd interviewed her fair share of those over the decades. I need to see it, she decided abruptly. This nexus. James grimaced. It doesn't work that way. The location shifts with the seasons, the moon phases. Only a listener can find it reliably. Then show me the evidence that convinced you. Show me why I should believe any of this. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Tomorrow. There's a place deeper in the forest, what's left of an old stone circle. If you're open to it, you might experience something there. Eleanor finished her bourbon, the warmth of the alcohol doing little to settle her whirling thoughts. Tomorrow, then. The drive back to her cabin was tense, her mind replaying the conversation with James while scanning the darkness for glimpses of the wolf, of Sentinel. Part of her wanted to dismiss the entire evening as the elaborate fantasy of an isolated community. Another part, the part that had always trusted her instincts as a journalist, recognized the ring of truth beneath the fantastic elements. Snow had begun falling again by the time she reached the cabin. As she parked and gathered her things, the sense of being watched returned stronger than ever. Eleanor paused at her door, peering into the swirling whiteness. "I know you're there," she called, feeling simultaneously foolish and defiant. No response came, but as she turned the key in her lock, a long, low howl echoed through the night, acknowledgement perhaps, or warning. Inside, Eleanor built up the fire and poured herself another bourbon, her grandmother's journal open on her lap. The entries from the last year of Evelyn's coherent life seemed newly significant. May 15th, 2014. The dreams are more vivid now. I see Eleanor standing at the stone circle, listening as I once did. I see the wolves gathering around her. I see Blackwood, older but no less dangerous. I tried to shield her from this burden, sending her away to the city as a child when her sensitivity began to show. Now I fear I've only delayed the inevitable. The forest has chosen her, as it once chose me. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Eleanor dressed in her warmest layers, preparing for the expedition with James with a mixture of skepticism and anticipation. She was loading extra batteries into her flashlight when a knock came at the door. It wasn't James, but a young woman Eleanor hadn't met before, perhaps in her early 30s, with short dark hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a practical down jacket over what appeared to be hiking clothes. Dr. Rebecca Winters, she introduced herself with a quick, firm handshake. I work with the Whispering Pines Research Station. James sent me to collect you. He's been delayed, but will meet us at the Stone Circle. Research station? Eleanor frowned. He didn't mention... We maintain a low profile, Rebecca cut in, already turning toward a rugged jeep parked behind Eleanor's car. For obvious reasons, we should get moving if we want to reach the site by noon. Something in the young woman's manner, a barely contained urgency, convinced Eleanor to follow. As they drove deeper into the forest on an unmarked trail, Rebecca explained that she was an ecologist specializing in integrated systems. This forest shouldn't exist, she stated matter-of-factly, navigating a particularly rough section. The biodiversity, the growth patterns, the resilience to environmental stressors, it defies conventional ecological models. Most of my colleagues attribute it to unique soil composition or microclimates. They're not entirely wrong, but they're missing the larger picture. The nexus, Eleanor said. Rebecca shot her an appraising look. James has briefed you then. Good. Time is shorter than we thought. Blackwood's operation has accelerated their timeline. They've already established a base camp just outside the protected zone. The jeep finally stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, a wall of dense evergreens. Rebecca killed the engine and reached into the back seat for a heavy backpack. We walk from here. Stay close. The paths shift sometimes. Eleanor followed Rebecca into the trees, surprised to find that what had appeared impenetrable from the jeep was actually the entrance to a narrow trail. They walked in silence for nearly an hour, the forest growing denser and somehow more alert around them. Eleanor couldn't explain the sensation except that each tree, each bush seemed to turn fractionally as they passed, like an audience following actors across a stage. The whispers returned, louder than before, occasionally resolving into almost comprehensible fragments. She comes. Evelyn's blood. The time approaches. You can hear them, can't you? Rebecca asked softly, noticing Eleanor's distraction. Yes. I never could. Not clearly, anyway. Just impressions, feelings. James says that's common for the protectors, a sensitivity to the forest's mood, but not its voice. She paused, adjusting her pack. Your grandmother could understand every word. They reached a small clearing where the trees pulled back to reveal a perfect circle of 12 standing stones, each about waist-high, arranged around a central flat stone that resembled an altar. The formation looked ancient, the stones weathered and covered in lichen, yet there was something deliberately maintained about the clearing itself, free of undergrowth, the ground covered in soft moss despite the season. James was waiting, seated on one of the outer stones. He rose as they approached, his expression grave. You made good time. Had to, Rebecca replied. Blackwood's team moved equipment in last night. Heavy machinery, drilling equipment. James cursed under his breath, then turned to Eleanor. This complicates things, but it also confirms our suspicions. He's making his move. Eleanor surveyed the stone circle, feeling a strange resonance, as if the ground beneath her feet was vibrating at a frequency just below perception. What is this place? An anchor point, James explained. One of several around the forest that help stabilize the energy of the nexus. Evelyn called them listening posts. He gestured to the central stone. If you're willing to try. A sharp crack echoed through the forest. A gunshot, followed by shouting. James tensed, reaching inside his jacket to produce a handgun that he'd somehow concealed. That's too close, Rebecca said, her voice tight. They shouldn't be able to. Another shot, closer this time, followed by the crashing sound of someone moving rapidly through underbrush. James positioned himself between the women and the disturbance, weapon raised. Get behind the center stone, he ordered. Both of you. Eleanor complied, pulling Rebecca with her. From their position, they watched as a man burst into the clearing, young, dressed in hunter's camouflage, his face scratched and panic-stricken. He skidded to a stop at the sight of James's gun. "Don't shoot!" he gasped. "It's after me!" "What is?" James demanded. Before the man could answer, a massive form exploded into the clearing, a black wolf larger than any natural specimen, its yellow eyes blazing with primal intelligence. The hunter screamed, raising his rifle, but James moved with surprising speed for his age, knocking the weapon aside. "No! You don't shoot Sentinel!" The distraction cost him. The terrified hunter shoved James aside and sprinted across the clearing, directly toward Eleanor and Rebecca. The wolf, Sentinel, snarled and gave chase. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The hunter reached them, grabbing Eleanor's arm with bruising force, using her as a shield. "Call it off!" he screamed. "Call off your devil wolf!" Sentinel halted several yards away, hackles raised, a growl vibrating from deep in his chest. His yellow eyes locked with Eleanor's, and in that moment, something impossible occurred. She heard him, not in whispers or impressions, but in clear, articulated thought. He carries death metal. He hunts the nexus for the dying man. Eleanor knew instinctively that death metal referred to the rifle, and the dying man was Blackwood. She also knew, with sudden certainty, that this was no ordinary wolf, just as this was no ordinary forest. "Let me go," she told the hunter, her voice calmer than she felt. "Not until that thing backs off." "He won't harm you if you drop the weapon." The hunter's grip tightened. "How do you know what it will—" "Because I can hear him," Eleanor said simply. "And he's promising me that if you don't remove your hand in the next 3 seconds, he'll remove it for you." Something in her tone, the absolute conviction perhaps, made the hunter's resolve waver. His grip loosened just enough for Eleanor to twist free. In the same moment, James recovered and had his weapon trained on the man again. "Down on the ground," James ordered. "Hands where I can see them." The hunter complied, all fight gone from him. James approached cautiously, kicking the rifle well away before producing zip ties from his pocket. As he secured the man's wrists, he glanced up at Eleanor with newfound respect. "You heard, Sentinel." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. "Yes." "That's impossible," Rebecca breathed. "He only communicates with listeners." Eleanor turned to the wolf, who had relaxed his aggressive posture and now sat watching her with those intelligent yellow eyes. The connection between them hummed like an electrical current. "Evelyn's blood runs true," Sentinel projected, "but time grows short. The dying man brings machines to crack the earth. The nexus trembles." "How do I find it?" Eleanor asked aloud. "The nexus? You already know. You have always known." With those cryptic words, the wolf rose and loped toward the trees, pausing once to look back at her before disappearing into the forest. James finished restraining the hunter and rejoined Eleanor and Rebecca. "What did he tell you?" "That Blackwood is bringing machinery to crack the earth," Eleanor reported. "He said the nexus is in danger." She hesitated, then added, "And he seemed to think I should know how to find it." James and Rebecca exchanged meaningful glances. "It's happening exactly as Evelyn predicted," Rebecca murmured. "We need to move quickly," James decided. "Rebecca, get our guest back to the station. Alert the others. I'll continue with Eleanor." He turned to her. "If you're willing." Eleanor looked at the stone circle, at the forest beyond, feeling the weight of generations pressing on her. Her grandmother's journals, the whispers, Sentinel's appearance, all of it pointing toward a role she had never imagined for herself, a responsibility she hadn't asked for, rooted in forces she barely understood. Yet beneath the doubt and fear ran a current of recognition. The forest had always spoken to her, even as a child, before her parents had moved her to Chicago, away from her grandmother's unhealthy influence. She had simply forgotten how to listen. "I'm willing," she said at last. "Show me what to do." As Rebecca departed with the subdued hunter, James guided Eleanor to the center stone. Evelyn would sit here for hours, listening. She described it as opening herself to the forest's consciousness, allowing it to flow through her rather than trying to grasp it. Eleanor settled onto the smooth, cold surface of the stone, feeling slightly ridiculous, yet undeniably expectant. "And then what?" "And then you listen," James said simply, stepping back to give her space. Eleanor closed her eyes, attempting to quiet the analytical part of her mind that insisted this was foolishness. The stone beneath her felt cooler than it should have given the ambient temperature, almost drawing heat from her body. She focused on that sensation, letting it anchor her as she tried to open herself, as James had described. At first, there was nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest, wind through branches, the occasional bird call, the distant tapping of a woodpecker. Then, gradually, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct than before. "Evelyn's blood. The cycle renews. Danger approaches." Eleanor concentrated, trying to isolate individual voices from the chorus. As she did, images began to flash across her closed eyelids, the forest seen from multiple perspectives simultaneously, as if viewed through thousands of eyes. She saw the stone circle from above, then from ground level. She saw a stream flowing over smooth rocks, a meadow covered in snow, a cave entrance partially concealed by hanging vines. The perspectives shifted faster. Prey animals fleeing from predators, saplings reaching toward sunlight, roots delving into rich soil. The experience was overwhelming, a sensory flood that threatened to drown her individual consciousness in a vast, interconnected network of awareness. Just as panic began to set in, a familiar presence brushed against her mind, calming, directing, focusing the chaotic input into coherent form. Sentinel. The wolf's consciousness guided her through the torrent of information, helping her find patterns, understand the language of the forest. And suddenly, she knew where the nexus was. Not in the sense of geographical coordinates, but as a living presence, a heartbeat at the center of a vast organism. She could feel its pulsing energy, its deep connection to every living thing in the forest. She could also feel its distress, like a shudder running through the entire system. The dying man's machines approach from the north, Sentinel communicated. They cut a road through ancient growth. They bring the death metal that poisons the ground. Eleanor opened her eyes with a gasp, the abrupt return to normal perception leaving her disoriented. James was kneeling beside her, concern etched on his weathered face. "Eleanor, are you all right?" She nodded, struggling to translate the overwhelming experience into words. "I saw everything. The forest, the animals, the trees, all connected, all part of a single system." She pressed a hand to her forehead, which had begun to throb. "And I know where the nexus is. At least I think I do." James helped her to her feet as she continued. "Blackwood's team is approaching from the north, cutting a road through the forest. Sentinel says they have something, death metal he called it, that poisons the ground." "Probably specialized drilling equipment," James muttered. "They've been developing new techniques for extraction in sensitive areas." He studied her face. "You're certain you can find the nexus?" "Yes." The conviction in her voice surprised even Eleanor. "But we need to hurry. It's afraid." James didn't question how a point of energy could experience fear. He simply nodded and gestured toward a path leading deeper into the forest. "Then lead the way, listener." As they moved through the increasingly dense woodland, Eleanor found herself navigating with a certainty that defied rational explanation. Each fork in the path, each obstacle presented itself with a clear indication of which way to turn. It wasn't visual so much as intuitive, a knowing that bypassed conscious thought. "The last time I saw Evelyn use her abilities like this was during the forest fire of 2008, James commented, as they traversed a particularly challenging section. She led firefighters directly to the heart of the blaze through smoke so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. "You really cared for her, didn't you?" Eleanor observed, noting the softness that entered his voice when he spoke of her grandmother. "We were partners for 20 years, in all ways." A sad smile crossed his face. When her dementia began, the forest felt it. That whole summer, the trees dropped their leaves early, as if in mourning. They walked in silence for a time, the forest growing denser, older. The trees here were giants, ancient pines and firs that had stood for centuries. The ground was springy with moss, and the light filtered through the canopy had an otherworldly quality, greenish-gold and diffuse. The whispers had become a constant background murmur, occasionally punctuated by clearer messages. "She comes, the bloodline endures, prepare the way." "We're getting close," Eleanor said, feeling a subtle pull drawing her forward. "It's just beyond that ridge." As they crested the small hill, a new sound reached them, mechanical, harsh, utterly at odds with the forest's rhythms, the distant growl of heavy machinery. James quickened his pace. "Blackwood's not waiting for permits. He's moving in now." They hurried forward, the forest seeming to part before them, branches shifting to create clearer paths. Eleanor felt the urgency of the trees around her, their collective alarm at the intrusion of destructive forces. The nexus revealed itself as a perfectly circular clearing dominated by a small lake of impossible clarity. The water reflected the sky so perfectly it was difficult to discern where one ended and the other began. Around the pool, wildflowers bloomed despite the winter season, their colors vibrant against the snow. The air hummed with energy, not a sound precisely, but a vibration felt in the bones. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "And vulnerable," James added grimly, pointing to the northern edge of the clearing where the sounds of machinery were growing louder. "Blackwood's team will reach this spot within hours at their current pace." Eleanor approached the edge of the pool, drawn by an irresistible pull. The water seemed to sing to her, calling with her grandmother's voice, with her own voice, with the collective voice of the forest itself. As she knelt beside it, her reflection shifted, for an instant showing not her face but Evelyn's, younger than Eleanor had ever known her, eyes alight with the same connection Eleanor now felt. "The cycle renews," whispered the forest. "The listener returns." A twig snapped behind them. Eleanor and James turned simultaneously to find Conrad Blackwood standing at the edge of the clearing, flanked by two men in tactical gear. Despite his age and the illness James had mentioned, Blackwood projected power and determination. His dark overcoat hung open, revealing an expensive suit underneath. In his hand, he held what appeared to be a small metal device with blinking lights. "Ms. Silverwood," he greeted her with cold courtesy. "Colonel Harrison, how convenient to find you both here." His gaze shifted to the pool, a hunger flickering across his aristocratic features. "And how helpful of you to lead us directly to what we've been seeking." James positioned himself between Blackwood and Eleanor. "This is protected land, Conrad. You have no authority here." "Authority?" Blackwood smiled thinly. "Authority is a flexible concept when one has sufficient resources." He lifted the device in his hand. "This little prototype, for instance, has proven remarkably effective at disrupting the energy patterns your forest spirits use to communicate. We've been testing it at the perimeter for weeks. It's how we found this place without your precious listener's help." Eleanor felt it then, a wrongness emanating from the device, like static drowning out the whispers, muffling the forest's voice. The trees around the clearing seemed to recoil, their energy withdrawing. "You're hurting it," she said, the words emerging before she could consider them. Blackwood's attention shifted fully to her, his eyes narrowing with interest. "So you really can hear it. Fascinating. Evelyn refused to discuss her abilities with me, even when I offered to fund her research. Perhaps you'll be more reasonable." "There's nothing reasonable about what you're planning," James countered. "Draining the Nexus won't just cure you. It will devastate the entire ecosystem." A necessary sacrifice. The energy contained in that pool could revolutionize medicine, power generation, a dozen industries. Blackwood's composure slipped slightly, revealing the desperate man beneath the corporate facade. "Besides, my concerns are more immediate. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer waits for no man, not even one of my resources." As he spoke, more figures emerged from the trees, men in work clothes carrying equipment cases, security personnel with holstered weapons. A full expedition team. "You have two choices," Blackwood continued. "Cooperate, help us understand how to properly access the energy, or be removed from the equation. Either way, I will have what I came for." Eleanor felt the forest's panic rising around her, the Nexus pulsing with alarm. Without conscious thought, she reached down, letting her fingers break the surface of the pool. The water was neither hot nor cold, but seemed to tingle against her skin, like gentle electricity. Instantly, images flooded her mind. Evelyn standing in this same spot decades ago, facing a younger Blackwood. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The Nexus is not a resource to be harvested. It's the living heart of the forest. Take from it, and everything connected to it suffers." Eleanor withdrew her hand, a new certainty filling her. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Mr. Blackwood. This isn't just energy to be extracted. It's connected to everything in this forest, every tree, every animal, every drop of water, including us." "Poetic, but irrelevant," Blackwood dismissed. "My scientists have been studying the energy patterns for months. We know how to contain and transport it." "Your scientists are wrong," Eleanor stated flatly. "And so are you." A low growl interrupted the standoff. From the trees emerged Sentinel, his massive form seeming to materialize from shadow. Behind him came others, wolves of various colors, moving with coordinated purpose. They spread out around the clearing, forming a protective ring. Blackwood's security team reached for their weapons, but he raised a hand, stopping them. "Impressive theatrics. I assume these are the guardian spirits mentioned in the local legends." His tone was mocking, but his eyes betrayed caution. "The dying man brings death to all if he touches the waters," Sentinel projected, the message reaching Eleanor with crystal clarity. He must be stopped. "I won't let you do this," Eleanor said, rising to her full height. Beside her, James tensed, ready for confrontation. Blackwood sighed, as if disappointed by their obstinance. "I had hoped for cooperation, but preparation is the better part of success." He nodded to his team. "Set up the equipment. If they interfere, restrain them." As the workers moved forward, Eleanor felt something rising within her, a connection to the Nexus, to the forest, to Sentinel and his pack. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single unified voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. The listener stands at the threshold. The choice is hers. The power is hers. In that moment, Eleanor Silverwood, retired editor, widow, city dweller, felt herself becoming something more. The forest waited, the wolves watched, and the future hung in the balance as Blackwood's men approached the sacred waters with their machines of extraction. The final confrontation had begun. As power surged through Eleanor's veins, the world around her seemed to slow. The forest whispers coalesced into a symphony of urgent voices, each tree, plant, and creature contributing to the chorus that reverberated through her consciousness. Blackwood's men advanced toward the Nexus pool with their extraction equipment, unaware of the fundamental shift occurring within the clearing. "Last chance, Ms. Silverwood," Blackwood called, his voice tight with the desperation of a dying man. "Stand aside and allow progress to take its course. I can make you wealthy beyond imagination." Eleanor felt the connection to the forest intensify, 1,000 images flooding her mind, the history of this place unfolding like pages in a living book. She saw the Nexus through centuries, witnessed previous listeners communing with its waters, felt the rhythmic pulse of energy that sustained the entire ecosystem. And underneath it all, she sensed Sentinel's presence, steady, ancient, a constant guardian through generations of human interference. "There is no price for this," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying a newfound authority that surprised even her. "The Nexus isn't yours to take, Mr. Blackwood. It belongs to everything that lives in this forest, including the wolves." At her words, Sentinel and his pack moved closer, their movements synchronized like dancers in a choreographed performance. The security personnel raised their weapons nervously, but Blackwood gestured for them to hold. "Wolves," he scoffed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Remarkable specimens, I grant you, but hardly mystical guardians. My scientists have documented their unusual size and behavior patterns for months." "Then your scientists missed the most important part," James interjected, moving to stand beside Eleanor. "These aren't just wolves. They're the physical manifestation of the forest's protective instinct. Kill them, and you'll only make them stronger." Eleanor knew instinctively that James was right. The wolves, particularly Sentinel, were bound to the Nexus in ways that transcended ordinary animal existence. They were vessels for its energy, conduits for its will. Blackwood's patience visibly thinned. "Enough of this superstitious nonsense. Begin the extraction procedure," he ordered his team. 2 technicians approached the pool with a cylindrical device that hummed with electrical current. As they positioned it at the water's edge, Eleanor felt a sharp pain lance through her chest, not physical, but a sympathetic response to the Nexus's distress. "They must not touch the waters," Sentinel's voice resonated in her mind. "The balance will break. The corruption will spread." Without conscious thought, Eleanor raised her hands. The gesture was instinctive, drawn from memories not her own, Evelyn's experiences flowing through her bloodline. The air around her fingers seemed to shimmer as she focused her newfound connection to the Nexus. "Stop," she commanded, her voice carrying the collective authority of generations of listeners. To everyone's astonishment, including Eleanor's, the technicians froze mid-motion. Not from obedience, but because the very air around them had thickened, becoming viscous like honey. They struggled against the invisible resistance, panic blooming in their eyes. "What is this?" Blackwood demanded, a mixture of fear and fascination crossing his features. "What are you doing?" Eleanor wasn't entirely sure herself. The power flowing through her felt both foreign and familiar, like rediscovering a language long forgotten. "Protecting what must be protected," she answered simply. James watched with wide eyes. "Evelyn could never do this," he murmured. "Not to this degree." "Ms. Silverwood has clearly been practicing party tricks," Blackwood sneered, recovering his composure. He turned to his security team. "Restrain her. Now." Two armed men advanced cautiously. Before they could reach Eleanor, Sentinel leapt forward with impossible speed, placing himself between her and the threat. The other wolves followed suit, forming a protective semicircle around Eleanor and James. The standoff might have escalated to violence then, if not for a new arrival. Rebecca Winters emerged from the trees, accompanied by several people Eleanor didn't recognize, men and women of various ages, all moving with the quiet confidence of those familiar with the wilderness. The protectors, James had mentioned. "You're too late, Conrad," Rebecca called. "The forest has chosen its new listener." Blackwood's expression darkened. "More mystical drivel. This changes nothing." He gestured to the device his technicians had been attempting to place. "That prototype represents 100 million in research and development. It will extract and contain the energy without destabilizing the source. Everyone profits." "Except the forest," Eleanor countered. "Except everything that lives within it." "Sacrifices for progress," Blackwood dismissed. "Surely an educated woman like yourself understands the concept." As they argued, Eleanor became aware of something strange happening to the Nexus pool. Its perfect reflective surface had begun to ripple outward from the center, though there was no wind. The vibrant flowers around its edges turned toward her like sunflowers tracking the sun. The forest was responding to her presence, to her connection, to her defense of its heart. "The choice approaches," whispered Sentinel in her mind. The old listener saw it. The dying man forces the moment before its time. "What choice?" Eleanor asked aloud, momentarily forgetting their audience. "To become, to bind, to transform." Before she could process this cryptic message, one of Blackwood's security men lost patience, or nerve, and fired his weapon. The shot went wild, splintering bark from a nearby ancient pine. The response was immediate and unexpected. The tree itself seemed to recoil, and a wave of anger surged through the clearing, a collective emotion so powerful that several of Blackwood's team staggered backward. The wolves growled in unison, a sound that reverberated through the ground itself. James and the other protectors moved into defensive positions, some drawing concealed weapons. The forest clearing, peaceful moments before, teetered on the edge of violence. "Enough!" Eleanor shouted, and to her astonishment, her voice carried an otherworldly resonance that stilled everyone present. Even the wolves paused, turning their attention to her. In the sudden silence, she addressed Blackwood directly. "You're dying. I understand desperation. But this isn't the answer. Not for you, not for anyone." "Easy for you to say," he replied bitterly. "You're not facing a death sentence." "We're all facing death, Conrad," James interjected softly. "The difference is what we're willing to destroy on our way out." Blackwood's face hardened. "Poetic, but I didn't build an empire by accepting limitations. If you won't cooperate, we'll proceed without you." He nodded to his team, who began unfolding larger equipment, drills, pumps, collection tanks. The intent was clear. They would take the Nexus water by force. Eleanor felt panic rising, not just her own, but the collective alarm of the forest itself. The whispers grew urgent, fragmented, a cacophony of distress signals. Something was happening to the Nexus pool as well. Its surface now churned like a pot about to boil, the water glowing with an internal light that pulsed in time with Eleanor's accelerated heartbeat. "The moment is now," Sentinel projected. "The Nexus calls for its listener. The binding must begin, or all will be lost." Rebecca approached Eleanor, seeming to sense the internal communication. "What is it? What's happening?" "It's calling me," Eleanor whispered. "The Nexus. It's afraid." James joined them, keeping a wary eye on Blackwood's team as they assembled their equipment. Afraid of what? Corruption. Destruction. Eleanor struggled to translate the complex emotions flowing through the forest consciousness. If they breach the waters with those machines, something will break. Not just here, but everywhere the Nexus energy flows. Rebecca's scientific mind processed this information rapidly. The energy network is like a mycelium system, interconnected throughout the entire forest. If they introduce contaminants or disrupt the flow pattern, it dies, Eleanor finished simply. All of it. James's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we stop them, whatever it takes." Eleanor shook her head slowly, a strange calm settling over her as understanding dawned. "No, that's not what's being asked of me." She looked toward the churning pool, its light now pulsing visibly even in daylight. "The Nexus needs a new anchor, a new listener who can fully bond with it. My grandmother knew this would happen. She saw it." "Bond how?" James asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. Before Eleanor could respond, Blackwood's technicians activated their drilling equipment. The harsh mechanical sound tore through the clearing like a physical assault. The wolves snarled, the trees seemed to recoil, and the Nexus pool surged violently. Pain lanced through Eleanor's body, a sympathetic response to the forest's distress. She fell to her knees, gasping. Around her, the other protectors also winced, their lesser connections to the forest still strong enough to feel its suffering. "Stop!" Rebecca shouted at Blackwood. "You're damaging the entire system!" "The initial reaction was anticipated," Blackwood replied coolly, though he watched the churning pool with scientific interest. "The energy stabilizes once containment begins." The drill bit touched the edge of the pool, and Eleanor screamed, not just with her voice, but with her mind. The sound echoed through the forest consciousness, rallying every connected being. Birds took flight in massive flocks. Distant animals fled or turned toward the clearing. The wolves howled in unison, and the Nexus responded. A column of water rose from the center of the pool, defying gravity, glowing with intense blue-white light. The drilling machine sparked and failed, its electronics overloaded by the energy surge. Blackwood's team backed away in alarm, but the man himself stood his ground, transfixed by the display. "Incredible," he murmured. "The power readings must be off the charts." Eleanor heard none of this. The world had narrowed to the connection between herself and the rising column of Nexus water. Sentinel moved to her side, his yellow eyes reflecting the unearthly light. "The choice is now," he communicated. "Become the listener in truth. Bind yourself to the Nexus. Save what must be saved." "What will happen to me?" Eleanor whispered, though she already sensed the answer. Change. Transformation. The human remains but becomes more, as all listeners before you. Evelyn refused this, Eleanor realized aloud. She walked away. She chose the human path, her daughter, her life among men. It was her right. The forest waited. Now it can wait no longer. The column of water began to take shape, forming what looked like a reaching hand. The sight provoked gasps from everyone present, even Blackwood's hardened security team. This was beyond scientific explanation, beyond rational understanding. This was the forest manifesting its consciousness in physical form. "Eleanor," James called, concern evident in his voice. "Whatever you're considering—" "I know what I'm doing," she responded with a calmness that surprised her. Did she know? Perhaps not the details, but the rightness of the path ahead had become crystal clear. She rose to her feet, feeling stronger despite the pain still echoing through her connection to the Nexus. With deliberate steps, she approached the edge of the pool, where the water column continued to pulse and shift. Behind her, she heard James call her name again, heard Blackwood ordering his people to restore the drilling equipment, heard Rebecca trying to reason with the technicians. None of it mattered now. The choice, as Sentinel had named it, crystallized before her. Eleanor Silverwood, retired editor, widow, city dweller, stood at the threshold of transformation. Behind her lay the human world with its comforts and limitations. Before her, the ancient consciousness of the forest offered something else, something both more and less than human. She thought of Robert, of the life they'd shared, of the emptiness his death had left. She thought of Chicago, of her career, of the ordered existence she'd built over decades. It seemed distant now, like a story read long ago. Here, in this clearing, with the Nexus calling and Sentinel watching, she felt more alive than she had in years. The connection to something larger than herself filled spaces within her that had been hollow since Robert's passing, perhaps even before. "I choose to listen," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying the weight of decision. "I choose to bind." She stepped forward into the pool, fully clothed, feeling the Nexus water embrace her. It was neither warm nor cold, but alive in a way no ordinary water could be. The liquid seemed to pulse against her skin, seeking entrance, communion. From the shore, she heard shouts of alarm, James calling her name, Blackwood demanding his team record everything, Rebecca ordering everyone to stay back. The wolves howled a sound that wasn't mourning, but celebration. The water rose around Eleanor, encasing her in a cocoon of living energy. It should have been terrifying, should have triggered panic and the instinct to flee. Instead, it felt like coming home. Images flashed through her mind faster than she could process. Generations of listeners communing with the Nexus, the forest growing and changing through centuries, Evelyn as a young woman standing in this same pool, making a different choice. The history of the land played like a film in fast forward, showing her its joys and sorrows, its threats and triumphs. And then came the change. It began subtly, a tingling sensation along her nerve endings, a shifting awareness of her body's boundaries. The Nexus energy seeped into her at the cellular level, rewriting something fundamental. Eleanor gasped as new sensations flooded her consciousness. She could feel every tree in the forest as if it were an extension of her body. She could sense the movement of animals miles away. The complex network of roots and mycelium beneath the soil became as clear to her as the veins in her own arms. The cocoon of water gradually lowered her back to the pool's edge, then receded, leaving her soaking, but transformed. Eleanor opened her eyes, and the world had changed. Colors were richer, scents more complex, sounds clearer. But the most profound difference was the awareness of connection, the intimate link to every living thing touched by the Nexus energy. The clearing had fallen silent. All eyes were fixed on her, the protectors with awe, Blackwood's team with fear, the wolves with recognition. Her clothing dripped with Nexus water that seemed reluctant to leave her, clinging like liquid silver. "Eleanor?" James approached cautiously. "Are you still you?" She smiled, finding the question both touching and amusing. "I'm me, just more." Her voice had gained a subtle resonance, as if multiple tones spoke simultaneously. Sentinel approached and bowed his massive head, a gesture of respect that the other wolves mimicked. The listener is bound. The Nexus is anchored. The cycle continues. Eleanor placed a hand on the wolf's head, feeling the connection between them strengthen. Through him, she sensed the entire pack, their individual personalities and histories becoming known to her in an instant. Blackwood broke the reverent silence, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his purpose. "Fascinating. The energy has clearly altered your neurological patterns. The applications could be revolutionary." Eleanor turned to face him, and something in her changed expression made him step back involuntarily. "The Nexus isn't a resource to be harvested, Mr. Blackwood. It's a living entity that maintains the balance of this entire ecosystem. I am now its voice and its guardian." "Superstitious nonsense," he scoffed, though with less conviction than before. "Whatever parlor tricks you've managed to produce, they won't stop progress." As if in response to his dismissal, the trees surrounding the clearing shifted, not swaying in wind, but actually moving their trunks and branches in coordinated motion. The effect was subtle but unmistakable. The forest itself was responding to Eleanor's emotions, to the threat Blackwood represented. The security team raised their weapons nervously, but Blackwood gestured for calm. "Impressive environmental manipulation," he acknowledged, "but ultimately irrelevant. My company owns the mineral rights to this entire region. The courts will see footage of what just happened here," Rebecca interrupted, holding up a small camera. "Including your illegal drilling operation in a protected conservation area. How many regulatory agencies would be interested in that, I wonder?" Blackwood's expression darkened. "You think a video of some environmental activist taking a swim and some wind in the trees will stop a billion-dollar operation? My lawyers would bury you before the case even reached a hearing." Eleanor listened to this exchange with new understanding. The human world of laws and corporations seemed simultaneously trivial and dangerous, a system that reduced the living miracle of the Nexus to resources and profit margins. Yet it was a system with real power, one that couldn't simply be dismissed. She reached out with her newly expanded awareness, connecting more deeply to the Nexus consciousness. "How have previous listeners protected you from men like this?" she asked silently. The answer came not in words but in images. Boundaries established, areas deemed sacred by indigenous peoples, later protected through conservation laws, listeners working with human allies, guiding without revealing the full truth of what they guarded. Balance maintained not through confrontation, but through subtle influence over centuries. Eleanor understood. Direct opposition wouldn't work. Blackwood and his company were symptoms of a larger disconnect, humanity's separation from the natural world it depended upon. The solution required a more nuanced approach. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying that strange, multiple resonance, "you came here seeking healing, not destruction. The cancer consuming you is not so different from what your machines would do to this forest." His eyes narrowed. "How do you know about my condition?" "I know many things now." She approached him slowly, the wolves parting to let her pass. The Nexus water still clung to her clothes, glimmering with subtle energy. "Your desperation is understandable, but this approach would destroy the very thing you seek to harness." "Pretty words," he said bitterly, "but words don't cure stage 4 cancer." "No," Eleanor agreed, stopping before him. "But this might." She reached out, palm upward, where a small pool of Nexus water had collected in her cupped hand. It glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "A sample?" Blackwood's eyes widened with naked hope. "A gift," Eleanor corrected. "Freely given, not taken. That distinction matters more than you know." His scientific skepticism warred visibly with desperate hope. "And the catch?" "You leave this place. You withdraw your equipment, your legal claims, your plans. You establish a conservation trust for the entire Whispering Pines forest with your considerable resources, and you never reveal what you've seen here today." Blackwood stared at the glowing liquid, then at Eleanor's transformed visage. "How do I know this will work? That this isn't just a trick to protect your precious forest?" "You don't," she said simply. "Faith is required, something I suspect has been in short supply in your life, Conrad." The use of his first name, spoken with a compassion that surprised even Eleanor, seemed to reach something in the man. For a brief moment, the corporate mask slipped, revealing the frightened human beneath, a man facing mortality despite all his wealth and power. "And if I refuse, try to take it by force?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "You won't leave this clearing with Nexus water unless I allow it. That's not a threat, just a truth you can feel in your bones." Blackwood glanced around the clearing, at the wolves with their unnatural intelligence, at the trees that had moved of their own accord, at the protectors standing ready. Most of all, he looked at Eleanor herself, transformed before his eyes into something neither fully human nor wholly other. Whatever calculations ran behind those shrewd eyes, they eventually led him to a conclusion. "A conservation trust," he repeated slowly, "in exchange for healing." "Yes. My lawyers will require certain guarantees, conditions—" "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Clean, simple, irrevocable. The forest protected in perpetuity. I'll know if you try to build in loopholes, Conrad. I'll always know." The certainty in her voice, the subtle power radiating from her transformed presence, finally convinced him. Blackwood nodded once, sharply. "Agreed." Eleanor extended her hand with its precious cargo. "Then drink." The clearing held its collective breath as Blackwood accepted the offering, bringing the glowing liquid to his lips with the reverence of a man taking communion. He hesitated only briefly before consuming it entirely. The effect was not immediate or dramatic, no Hollywood moment of instant healing. Instead, a subtle change came over him, a relaxing of tension he might not have even realized he carried. The lines of pain around his eyes softened, his breathing deepened. "It feels warm," he murmured, surprised. "The work has begun," Eleanor told him. "The healing will continue over days, not instantly. The Nexus energy will remain within you, repairing what's damaged, but only if you honor our agreement." Blackwood touched his abdomen where the pancreatic tumor had been causing increasing pain. "I feel it," he acknowledged quietly. "Something is happening." Eleanor nodded, then turned to address the technicians and security personnel. "Pack up your equipment. Leave nothing behind. The Nexus must remain undisturbed." To everyone's surprise, Blackwood reinforced her order. "Do as she says. Project Wellspring is being reconfigured." When his operations manager began to protest, Blackwood cut him off. "I'll explain back at headquarters. For now, consider it a direct order." As Blackwood's team began dismantling their equipment, Eleanor rejoined James, Rebecca, and the other protectors. The wolves remained close, sentinel at her side like a shadow. "That was unexpected," James murmured, watching Blackwood with suspicious eyes. "Do you trust him?" "Trust isn't necessary," Eleanor replied. "The Nexus water within him creates a connection I can monitor. If he violates our agreement, I'll know, and so will the water itself." Rebecca studied Eleanor with scientific curiosity. "The transformation is remarkable. Your cellular structure must be fundamentally altered. I'd love to run some tests, with your permission, of course." Eleanor smiled at the researcher's enthusiasm. "Perhaps someday. For now, there's much I need to learn about what I've become." "Evelyn would be proud," James said softly. "She always believed you would return when the forest needed you most." The mention of her grandmother brought a wave of emotion. She knew this would happen. That's why she left me the cabin, why she recorded so much in her journals. She was preparing me, even from beyond. As they spoke, the clearing gradually emptied of Blackwood's personnel. The man himself approached one last time before departing, his manner markedly changed, less arrogant, more thoughtful. "I'll have my legal team draft the Conservation Trust documents immediately," he stated. "You'll want your own representatives to review them, I assume." "That won't be necessary," Eleanor replied. "The forest will know your intentions as you write each clause. Honesty will serve you better than clever wording." Blackwood shook his head, a bemused expression crossing his features. "I've built empires, negotiated with world leaders, revolutionized industries. Yet here I stand, making deals with—" He gestured vaguely at Eleanor's transformed appearance. "With the forest itself," she completed for him. "A humbling experience, perhaps, but a necessary one." "Indeed." He hesitated, then offered a final observation. "You know, you've given up a great deal today, Ms. Silverwood. Your normal life, your future as you imagined it. Was it worth the sacrifice?" Eleanor considered the question, feeling the vastness of the forest consciousness flowing through her, the ancient wisdom of the Nexus, the companionship of Sentinel and his pack. The emptiness that had haunted her since Robert's death had been filled with something larger than herself, a purpose that would span decades, perhaps centuries. "It wasn't a sacrifice," she answered truthfully. "It was a transformation. There's a difference." Blackwood nodded, seeming to understand on some level. With a final glance at the Nexus pool, he turned and left the clearing, following the path his team had taken. As the forest fell quiet again, Eleanor felt a profound shift in the atmosphere: relief, gratitude, welcome. The trees rustled without wind, the Nexus pool settled into calm reflection, the wolves relaxed their vigilant postures. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the expanded awareness of her new existence. "Now I learn what it truly means to be a listener, to be the voice of the forest, to maintain the balance." "You won't be alone," James assured her, gesturing to the assembled protectors. "This group has safeguarded the forest and assisted listeners for generations." "And I'd like to document everything," Rebecca added eagerly. "The ecological implications alone could revolutionize conservation science, even without revealing the mystical aspects." Eleanor smiled at their support, but felt a pull toward solitude, toward communion with the Nexus consciousness that now shared her being. "Thank you both. But first, I need time. The forest has much to teach me." They understood, stepping back respectfully. The other protectors began to disperse as well, returning to their various roles in the human world. Soon, only Eleanor, James, and the wolves remained in the clearing. "Will you be all right at the cabin?" James asked, practical concerns asserting themselves. "You've undergone a profound change. The adjustment period can be disorienting, according to Evelyn's journals." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his concern. "I'll manage. Sentinel will stay with me." She glanced at the massive wolf, who confirmed with a mental acknowledgement. "And I suspect the forest itself will guide me through the transition." James hesitated, then embraced her briefly. "Evelyn was my dearest friend. I miss her every day, but seeing you take up her mantle, seeing the forest choose you, brings a kind of closure I didn't know I needed." When he pulled away, Eleanor noticed moisture in his eyes. "You loved her," she realized aloud. "For most of my adult life," he admitted. "Even after she chose to focus on raising her family, on being a grandmother to you. The forest always came first for her, then her human connections. I understood that." "And now history repeats itself," Eleanor mused. "Except I don't have a family to divide my loyalties. Perhaps that's why the transformation was more complete for me than it was for her." James smiled sadly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you simply made a different choice." With a final nod of respect, he too departed, leaving Eleanor alone with the wolves in the sacred clearing. The afternoon sun filtered through the ancient trees, casting dappled patterns across the Nexus pool. Eleanor approached the water again, studying her reflection. The face that looked back was recognizably hers, yet subtly altered. Her eyes held an otherworldly luminescence. Her silver-streaked hair moved slightly, as if in a breeze, even when the air was still. Most striking was the pattern of faint, glowing lines that had appeared on her skin, an intricate network resembling tree branches or river systems, pulsing softly with Nexus energy. "The marking of a true listener," Sentinel explained, appearing beside her in the reflection. "The visible sign of your bond with the Nexus. It will fade when you walk among humans, strengthen when you commune with the forest." "Will I age?" she asked, suddenly curious about the practical aspects of her transformation. "Differently. Slowly. The Nexus sustains its chosen ones. Evelyn would have lived much longer had she maintained the full bond." Eleanor nodded, absorbing this information without surprise. The concept of extended life should have been shocking, yet it felt natural within the context of her new existence. The forest operated on a different timescale than human civilization. Decades were moments in the life of ancient trees. "I need to learn everything," she said, both to Sentinel and to the forest consciousness that now shared her mind. How to protect the Nexus, how to maintain balance, how to use these new abilities. "Time enough for all lessons," came the response. "Today, rest, integrate, become. Eleanor realized she was indeed exhausted, not physically, but in the deep mental fatigue that follows profound revelation. The transformation had demanded everything from her, reshaping her at fundamental levels. She needed to process, to adjust, to accept what she had become. "Yes," she agreed. "Rest first. Tomorrow the learning begins." With Sentinel at her side and the other wolves forming a loose protective circle, Eleanor left the Nexus clearing, following the path back toward her grandmother's cabin. Each step felt different now, more connected, more aware of the living earth beneath her feet. The forest that had seemed alien when she first arrived now extended a constant welcome, like old friends greeting her after a long absence. The whispers remained, but they were no longer incomprehensible or mysterious. They were conversations she could join at will, discussions between trees about weather patterns, wolves communicating hunting strategies, birds sharing news of distant lands. The collective consciousness of the forest had become accessible to her, a vast network of information and awareness that would take years to fully explore. As twilight descended and the first stars appeared above the trees, Eleanor reached the cabin that had been her grandmother's for decades. It looked different through her enhanced perception, not just a human dwelling, but a place where the human and forest worlds overlapped. Generations of listeners had lived here, communing with the Nexus while maintaining their ties to humanity. Sentinel paused at the tree line, hesitating to approach the human structure. "You're welcome inside," Eleanor told him. "This is as much your home as mine now." The wolf considered, then shook his massive head. "Tonight, I guard. Tomorrow, perhaps. The pack needs direction after today's events." Eleanor understood. The wolves, like the trees and other forest beings, had their own societies, their own responsibilities. Sentinel was not merely her companion, but a leader within the forest hierarchy. "Until tomorrow, then," she agreed. As she entered the cabin alone, Eleanor was struck by how quickly everything had changed. Just that morning, she had been a recent widow seeking solitude, a retired editor with no clear purpose. Now she stood transformed, the newest in an ancient line of forest guardians, bound to the Nexus in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. She moved through the familiar rooms, touching objects that connected her to her grandmother with new appreciation. The desk where Evelyn had written her journals, the reading chair where she had communed with the forest consciousness, the kitchen where she had prepared natural remedies using plants guided by forest wisdom. Eleanor paused at the window, looking out at the darkness where she knew Sentinel and his pack patrolled. Beyond them lay the village of Whisper Ridge, the human world with its complexities and contradictions. Blackwood and his company, with their ambitions and innovations, the modern world that both threatened and depended upon the ancient forest. As the listener, she would stand between these worlds, interpreting, protecting, guiding. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time since Robert's death, Eleanor felt completely alive. The emptiness that had driven her to this remote cabin had been filled with purpose, with connection, with belonging. Outside, a wolf howled, a long, haunting call that was answered by others throughout the forest. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the resonance of those voices in her transformed body. She added her own silent acknowledgement through the mental connection she now shared with the forest beings. "I am here," she projected into the collective consciousness. "I am listening. I am becoming." The forest responded with a wave of acceptance and welcome that washed over her like gentle rain. Eleanor Silverwood, the newest listener, the guardian of the Nexus, smiled in the darkness as she began her first night of a transformed existence, no longer merely human, but something the modern world had forgotten how to name. Tomorrow would bring challenges, adjustments, lessons. Blackwood would need monitoring. The protectors would need guidance. The forest itself would have demands and needs to communicate. But tonight, in the quiet of her grandmother's cabin, Eleanor simply existed in the moment of transition, embracing the ancient role that had found her when she needed it most. Outside, the forest whispered. Inside, she listened. And in that communion, both were transformed. 3 days had passed since Eleanor's transformation at the Nexus. The full moon that had witnessed her bonding with the ancient forest consciousness now waned in the night sky, casting silver patterns through the cabin windows as she sat reviewing her grandmother's final journals. Though barely half a week had gone by, Eleanor scarcely recognized the woman she had been before, a grieving widow seeking solitude, a retired editor with no clear purpose. That version of herself seemed distant now, like a character in someone else's story. The luminescent patterns that had appeared on her skin during transformation now shifted with her moods and intentions, nearly invisible when she was at rest, glowing softly when she connected more deeply with the forest consciousness. Currently, they traced faint silvery lines along her forearms as she absorbed her grandmother's final written words. December 17th, 2014. The dreams are clearer now. I see Eleanor standing before the nexus, making the choice I could not make. The forest has patience beyond human understanding. It has waited for me, and now it waits for her. James promises to guide her when the time comes, though I fear what the years may bring before then. The balance weakens, the network diminishes. Each season, another connection fails. My mind grows less reliable with each passing moon. The healers have their clinical terms, early onset dementia they call it, but I know better. This is the price of walking away from the full bonding all those decades ago. The forest offered its heart, and I accepted only a piece, choosing my human family instead. No regrets, but consequences nonetheless. I leave these journals. I leave the cabin. I leave what knowledge I can preserve. The rest is in the water, in the trees, in the stones that remember. Eleanor closed the journal, touched by her grandmother's foresight and sacrifice. Evelyn had chosen a different path, prioritizing family over the full communion with the forest. Now Eleanor, who had arrived at this crossroads with no such competing commitments, had embraced the complete transformation her grandmother had declined. Sentinel lay near the hearth, his massive black form appearing to doze, but maintaining the vigilant awareness that was his nature. Since her transformation, the wolf had rarely left her vicinity, serving as both protector and guide as she navigated her new existence. She knew, Eleanor said softly. All those years ago, she saw that I would come here, that I would make a different choice than she did. Sentinel's yellow eyes opened, regarding her thoughtfully. The forest sees possibilities unfolding like branches from a trunk. Your grandmother glimpsed one such branch, the one that has now come to pass. And what other branches exist now? Eleanor wondered aloud. What possibilities unfold from this moment? Many, came the simple reply, some bright with healing, others dark with continued destruction. The listener influences which grows strongest. A knock at the door interrupted their exchange. Even before rising to answer it, Eleanor knew who stood on her porch. James Harrison, the retired colonel who had served as her grandmother's loyal protector for decades. Her enhanced senses recognized his distinctive energy signature, a blend of military precision and deep connection to the forest he had defended for nearly 30 years. When she opened the door, James stood with an expression that mixed concern and urgency. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Blackwood's legal team has drafted the Conservation Trust documents, and there's something else happening at the eastern boundary." Eleanor ushered him in, noting the lines of fatigue on his weathered face. James had been working tirelessly since her transformation, coordinating with the local protectors, maintaining surveillance on Blackwood's withdrawing team, and gathering intelligence on other potential threats to the forest. "You're exhausted," she observed as he took his customary seat near the fire. "When did you last sleep properly?" James dismissed her concern with a slight shake of his head. "I've operated on less rest during 3 separate combat deployments. This is more important." "The Conservation Trust?" Eleanor prompted, deciding not to press the issue of his self-care for now. "Rebecca's been reviewing the draft with an environmental lawyer from Burlington." He produced a thick envelope from his jacket. "It's surprisingly solid. Blackwood's team has created a genuine ironclad protection framework for the entire Whispering Pines region." Eleanor wasn't entirely surprised. The Nexus water he consumed ensures a certain level of compliance. He physically cannot betray that agreement without severe consequences. "So that part of your plan is working," James acknowledged. "But we have a new problem. Industrial activity has accelerated at the eastern boundary, a mining operation that wasn't there 2 weeks ago." "I've sensed it," Eleanor admitted. "The forest has been showing me disturbances in that area, crystalline formations being extracted from deep underground." James looked surprised. "You've been monitoring it? Why didn't you mention this earlier?" "Because I've been learning to understand what I'm sensing," Eleanor explained. "The forest consciousness communicates differently than humans, in impressions, emotions, fragmented memories. It's taken time to interpret what I'm receiving." She moved to the large map of the Whispering Pines region that she'd pinned to the cabin wall, pointing to an area just beyond the eastern forest boundary. "They're extracting something the forest calls sleeping stones, crystalline formations that share a resonance with the Nexus energy, but in dormant form." "And this is bad because," James prompted, "because these formations are part of the larger network that connects Nexus points across the continent. Removing them is like cutting the power lines between electrical stations. Each extraction further isolates our Nexus from others that might still exist." James frowned, the strategic part of his military mind engaging with this new information. "Do we know who's behind this operation?" "Not Blackwood," Eleanor said with certainty. "Different energy signature, more scientific, less profit-driven. They're seeking these crystals for specific properties, not just resource extraction." As they discussed the situation, Sentinel rose suddenly, his posture alert. "Vehicles approach," he communicated. "Government humans." Eleanor extended her awareness, confirming Sentinel's warning. "Agent Foster is back," she told James, "with at least 3 vehicles." James tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the concealed weapon he carried. Is this a coincidence, or did they somehow know we were discussing the eastern boundary issue? "I don't believe in such coincidences," Eleanor replied, moving to the window as 3 black SUVs appeared on the narrow access road. "But let's hear what they have to say before jumping to conclusions." Agent Diana Foster emerged from the lead vehicle, as crisp and professional as she had been during their first meeting 5 days earlier. She approached the cabin alone this time, her tactical team remaining with the vehicles, a gesture of respect that Eleanor noted and appreciated. "Ms. Silverwood," Foster greeted when Eleanor opened the door, "I apologize for the unannounced visit, but developments require immediate discussion." "The mining operation at the eastern boundary," Eleanor stated rather than asked. Foster's expression registered brief surprise before returning to professional neutrality. "Yes, I see you're already aware." "The forest speaks to its listener," Eleanor replied simply, inviting Foster inside with a gesture. The agent nodded respectfully to James before taking a seat at the small kitchen table. "The operation is run by Quantum Materials Research, a private corporation with government contracts. They're extracting crystalline formations with unique electromagnetic properties." "The sleeping stones," Eleanor said. "That's an appropriate name for them," Foster acknowledged. "We've been monitoring QMR for months. Their harvesting of these formations has already impacted 2 dormant nexus points in the Midwest. Now they've identified a deposit here, just outside the protected area that Blackwood's Conservation Trust will establish." "Convenient timing," James noted skeptically. Foster's expression tightened. "We believe there may be a leak within our division. Someone providing information about the Nexus network to private interests." Eleanor studied the agent carefully, her enhanced senses detecting no deception, genuine concern, fatigue, and something that might be guilt, but no dishonesty. "You came to warn us." "And to propose a joint response," Foster confirmed. "My team has legal authority to challenge their permits on environmental grounds, but that's a slow process. Meanwhile, your connection to the forest offers more immediate options." "You want me to use the Nexus energy to interfere with their operation," Eleanor surmised. "Nothing that would harm anyone," Foster clarified quickly, "but perhaps make the location less viable for extraction." James leaned forward, his military mind analyzing potential strategies. "Why not simply shut them down through official channels? You said your division has authority." Foster's hesitation told Eleanor more than her subsequent words. Our authority is contested at the moment. Internal political shifts have created factions. Director Chen still supports our preservation mission, but other elements within the government see the Nexus network as a potential resource or security asset. And these factions are supporting QMR's operation, Eleanor concluded. We believe so, yes. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Sentinel, who had positioned himself near the door, observing the conversation with intelligent yellow eyes. The wolf's mental communication brushed against her consciousness. She speaks truth, but not all truth. What aren't you telling us, Agent Foster? Eleanor asked directly. The agent's composure faltered briefly. The crystals they're extracting, when properly processed, can amplify or disrupt Nexus energy. They were historically used by indigenous cultures as ritual objects near Nexus points. In modern hands, with contemporary technology, they could be weaponized against the Nexus itself, Eleanor finished, the implications becoming clear. Or used to artificially stimulate it for energy production. Yes. Foster's admission was reluctant but honest. Either approach would be catastrophic for the ecological balance the Nexus maintains. Director Chen has been fighting to classify these formations as protected resources, but the process is mired in bureaucracy and competing interests. Eleanor considered this information, consulting both her human judgment and the deeper wisdom of the forest consciousness that now shared her mind. She sensed the ancient tree's alarm at this threat, not just to the local ecosystem, but to the entire interconnected network that sustained life across the continent. I've already taken some preliminary actions, Eleanor revealed. 3 nights ago, I asked the forest to discourage their operations, equipment malfunctions, unstable terrain, weather fluctuations, minor obstacles that might delay them without causing harm. Foster looked both impressed and concerned. That explains the reports of unusual difficulties they've been experiencing, but they're persistent, and they have resources to overcome such obstacles. Then we need a more comprehensive approach, Eleanor decided, one that combines your legal authority, James's tactical experience, and my connection to the forest. For the next hour, the 3 of them developed a strategy that leveraged their complementary strengths. Foster would initiate an official environmental review, creating paperwork and inspections that would temporarily slow the operation. James would coordinate the local protectors to document violations and maintain surveillance. And Eleanor would work with the forest consciousness to make the crystal formations themselves more difficult to locate and extract. There's one more thing, Foster said as they finalized their plan. Director Chen has authorized me to share something with you, information about other potential listeners. This captured Eleanor's full attention. There are others? Active listeners? Not currently active, no, but individuals with the genetic predisposition who might be capable of bonding with dormant Nexus points, as you have with this one. Foster removed a secure tablet from her briefcase, accessing a classified file. We've been tracking bloodlines descended from known listeners for generations. Currently, there are 17 individuals across North America with significant genetic markers. The tablet displayed a map with glowing points indicating both dormant Nexus locations and the current residences of potential listeners. Eleanor studied it with growing excitement and concern. Most of them don't align geographically. The potential listeners aren't living near the Nexus points they could activate. Exactly the problem, Foster agreed. Historically, listener families remained near their assigned Nexus for generations, but modern mobility has scattered the bloodlines. Many of these individuals have no idea of their heritage or potential. We'd need to locate them, educate them, and somehow convince them to uproot their lives to bond with a Nexus point, James observed skeptically. That's asking a lot. It is, Foster acknowledged, but the alternative is watching the entire network continue to deteriorate until it collapses entirely. Eleanor felt the weight of this revelation settle over her. The transformation she had undergone had been her personal choice, made at a moment when her life lacked direction and purpose. Asking others, people with established lives, families, careers, to make the same choice was an entirely different proposition. "I need to think about this," she told Foster. "The immediate priority is protecting our local nexus and stopping the crystal extraction. This larger mission that requires careful consideration." Foster nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "Of course. Director Chen simply wanted you to know that resources exist if you decide to help rebuild the network." As Foster prepared to leave, Eleanor walked her to the door. "One question, Agent Foster. The genetic markers your division tracks. You have them too, don't you? That's how you understand what's happening here so intuitively." The agent paused, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal a more personal vulnerability. "Yes. My great-grandmother was the listener for the Cascade Nexus in Oregon. The ability has diminished through generations, but it left sensitivity." "Enough to lead you to this work," Eleanor surmised. "We all serve in our own ways, Ms. Silverwood, some through transformation, others through more conventional channels." With that philosophical observation, Foster departed, her tactical team falling in behind her as they returned to their vehicles. After the government agents had gone, Eleanor and James refined their strategy for addressing the crystal mining operation. By sunset, they had established communication protocols with the local protectors and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. "I should get back to town," James said finally, gathering his notes. "Rebecca's expecting updates, and the protectors need briefing on their new assignments." "Thank you," Eleanor said sincerely, "for everything you've done, not just now but for decades. My grandmother was fortunate to have such a dedicated ally." James's weathered features softened at the mention of Evelyn. "She was remarkable, stubborn as hell, brilliant, and absolutely fearless when the forest was threatened." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You remind me of her, though you've taken a path she chose not to." "The full bonding," Eleanor acknowledged. "She chose family instead." "She never regretted that choice," James assured her. "Even when the connection began to fade in her later years, she loved your grandfather, your mother, you. The human connections meant everything to her." As James departed, Eleanor reflected on the different choices available to listeners throughout history. Her grandmother had chosen a balanced approach, partial bonding that allowed her to maintain a conventional human life while still serving the forest in a limited capacity. Eleanor had chosen complete integration, transforming herself in ways that were still unfolding. The waxing moon rose above the trees as evening deepened into night. Eleanor sat on the cabin porch, Sentinel a silent companion beside her, both of them monitoring the subtle energy flows of the forest. Something had changed since Foster's visit, a tension in the ecosystem, as if the ancient consciousness recognized both the threat and the potential for renewal that the agent's information represented. "You consider seeking the other listeners," Sentinel observed, his mental voice brushing against Eleanor's thoughts. "Yes," she admitted. "If there truly are others who could restore dormant nexus points, the entire network might be revitalized." "A worthy goal," the wolf acknowledged, "but not without cost. Each would face the choice you faced, between human life and forest service." "A choice each must make for themselves," Eleanor affirmed. "I wouldn't force transformation on anyone." "Yet the need grows," Sentinel reminded her. "The network weakens. The balance shifts toward breaking." Eleanor sighed, feeling the truth of his words resonating through her transformed awareness. The Nexus Network, the living system that maintained ecological balance across the continent, was indeed approaching a critical threshold. The crystal mining operation was merely a symptom of a larger problem: humanity's disconnection from the natural world that sustained it. One crisis at a time, she decided. First, we address the immediate threat. Then we can consider the larger mission. Sentinel accepted this wisdom with a slight inclination of his massive head. Tonight, then, we strengthen our boundaries. Understanding his meaning, Eleanor rose and stepped off the porch onto the forest floor. The luminescent patterns on her skin brightened as she established deeper connection with the ecosystem. Together, she and Sentinel began walking toward the eastern boundary, where the mining operation continued despite the obstacles the forest had already created. Unlike her previous nighttime journey 3 days ago, this excursion had clear purpose and direction. Eleanor moved with growing confidence through the darkened forest, her enhanced senses mapping the terrain in ways impossible for ordinary humans. The trees seemed to bend slightly as she passed, creating easier paths. Night creatures acknowledged her presence with respectful distance. She was no longer merely passing through the forest. She was moving within it as an integral component of its consciousness. They reached the ridge overlooking the mining operation in half the time of her previous journey. Below, floodlights illuminated a scene of industrial determination. Heavy equipment cutting into the earth, technicians monitoring extraction processes, security personnel patrolling the perimeter. Despite the minor obstacles Eleanor had previously asked the forest to create, the operation had adapted and continued. "They're persistent," she observed quietly. "Humans often are when seeking power," Sentinel replied, "especially power they do not understand." Eleanor knelt on the forest floor, placing both palms against the earth to establish a deeper connection. Through the network of roots and mycelium that connected all living things, she could sense the crystalline formations deep underground, the sleeping stones that resonated with Nexus energy in dormant form. They had existed here for millennia, part of the larger circuit that connected active Nexus points across the continent. "They don't understand what they're taking," she murmured. "These aren't just unusual minerals, they're components of a living system." With careful focus, Eleanor directed her awareness toward the crystals themselves. The forest consciousness responded to her intention, channeling energy downward through soil and stone. Unlike her previous request for generalized obstacles, this was a more specific intervention, encouraging the crystalline formations to shift deeper, to become less accessible, to preserve their most essential elements from extraction. The response was subtle but immediate. Deep underground, the crystal veins began to retreat from the mining equipment, moving incrementally deeper into the Earth's embrace. On the surface, sensors and drilling equipment registered these changes as unexpected anomalies. Eleanor watched as technicians gathered around monitoring stations, gesturing with confusion at readings that suddenly made no sense. "Not stopping them," she acknowledged, "but complicating their work significantly." "It buys time," Sentinel agreed. "Time for your government ally to implement her legal strategies." They remained on the ridge for several hours, Eleanor maintaining the focused energy that encouraged the crystal's migration deeper into the earth. By midnight, the operation had slowed considerably, with supervisors holding urgent conferences and equipment standing idle as engineers attempted to reconcile contradictory data. As they finally turned to head back to the cabin, Eleanor felt a sudden shift in the forest's energy, a new presence approaching from the north, moving with purpose toward the mining operation. She extended her awareness, sensing a small group of humans traveling through the forest with surprising skill. "Not Foster's team," she murmured to Sentinel. "Different energy signature, more connected to the land." "The old ones," Sentinel identified. "Those who remembered the listeners before written words." Eleanor adjusted their path to intercept these new arrivals, curiosity mingling with caution. Within minutes, they encountered a group of 5 individuals moving silently through the forest. 3 men and 2 women, ranging in age from perhaps 30 to 70, all displaying a natural comfort in the wilderness that spoke of lifelong experience. The eldest woman stopped first, raising a hand to halt the others when she sensed Eleanor and Sentinel ahead. Rather than displaying fear at the massive wolf's presence, she inclined her head in a gesture of respect. "The forest speaks of change," the woman said in greeting. "A new listener walks the old paths." Eleanor stepped forward, the luminescent patterns on her skin providing subtle illumination in the darkness. "I am Eleanor Silverwood. My grandmother was Evelyn, who served as listener before me." "Margaret Hawkins," the woman introduced herself. "I knew Evelyn well. We gathered healing plants together for many years." She gestured to her companions. "We are the Hidden Circle, descendants of those who worked with listeners long before this land had English names." Eleanor recognized the term from her grandmother's journals, local individuals with traditional knowledge who had assisted listeners throughout generations. Not protectors like James with his military approach to forest defense, but keepers of ancient wisdom and practices. "You're heading toward the mining operation," Eleanor observed. Margaret nodded. "We monitor threats to the boundary. This extraction risks more than just forest land. It endangers the connections between sacred places." "The Crystal Network," Eleanor confirmed. "I've been working to protect it, encouraging the formations to migrate deeper underground." The oldest man in the group, his silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, stepped forward. "I am Daniel Three Rivers. My grandfather was keeper of the crystal knowledge before these lands were divided by paper boundaries. What you attempt is good, but temporary. The sleeping stones can only move so far before they disconnect from their proper alignment." Eleanor sensed the truth in his words. Her strategy was a stopgap measure, not a permanent solution. "What would you suggest?" "The stones must be awakened, not hidden," Daniel replied. "When active, they resist extraction. They become too hot, too volatile for mechanical removal." "Awakened how?" Margaret and Daniel exchanged glances, a silent communication born of long partnership. "There is a ritual," Margaret explained, "passed down through generations. It requires a listener's energy, focused through specific preparations and at the proper lunar phase." "Which is 3 nights from now," Daniel added. "When the moon reaches quarter phase." Eleanor felt the forest consciousness respond to this information, recognition, affirmation, ancient memory stirring. "You've done this before." "Not in my lifetime," Daniel admitted. "Not since the last full listener served this forest, 3 generations ago. Evelyn never completed the full bonding, so the ritual remained dormant during her stewardship." The implications settled over Eleanor like early morning dew. Her grandmother's choice, to maintain her human connections at the cost of fuller forest integration, had limited certain protective measures that required complete transformation. The ritual these elders proposed would only be possible because Eleanor had made a different choice. "I'll need to know everything about this ritual," she decided. "The preparations, the timing, the risks." Margaret nodded approvingly. "We hoped you would say that. The Hidden Circle has preserved this knowledge, waiting for a listener who could implement it. We will teach you what we know." They agreed to meet the following evening at a sacred site deeper in the forest, a gathering place the Hidden Circle had maintained through generations. As the elders continued their journey to observe the mining operation more closely, Eleanor and Sentinel resumed their path back to the cabin. "The forest has more allies than I realized," she commented as they walked through the moonlit woods. "Many serve in different ways," Sentinel replied. "Some with science, like your friend Rebecca. Some with protection, like James. Some with ancient memory, like the Hidden Circle. The listener connects all paths." Eleanor considered this wisdom as they traveled. Her unique position, bridging modern human understanding and ancient forest consciousness, allowed her to integrate these diverse approaches to environmental protection. The scientist, the protector, the traditional knowledge keepers, each had valuable contributions that, combined, created a more powerful response than any could achieve alone. They reached the cabin as false dawn began lightening the eastern sky. Despite the long night's exertions, Eleanor felt energized rather than exhausted, her transformed physiology processing fatigue differently than her former human self. Still, she recognized the need for rest and rejuvenation. Not sleep precisely, but a period of quiet communion with the nexus energy that now flowed through her being. As she settled onto the porch swing, watching the forest awaken to early morning light, Eleanor reflected on how rapidly her understanding had evolved in the weeks since her transformation. The journal entries that had seemed mysterious upon her arrival now made perfect sense. The whispers that had unsettled her on first hearing now formed a coherent symphony of information. The forest that had initially appeared as merely scenic backdrop had revealed itself as a complex, intelligent system of which she was now an integral part. Sentinel lay nearby, his vigilant presence a constant comfort. Through their mental connection, Eleanor sensed his approval of the night's work and the alliance with the Hidden Circle. 3 days until the ritual, she mused aloud. Time enough to prepare, but not much margin for error. The forest will guide you, Sentinel assured her. as it has guided listeners since the first humans walked these lands. Eleanor nodded, accepting both the responsibility and the support. In 3 days, she would attempt an ancient ritual to awaken dormant crystal formations, not just to thwart the current mining operation, but to strengthen the entire Nexus network that maintained ecological balance across the continent. It was a crucial step in her evolving role as listener, forest guardian, and bridge between worlds. As the sun broke fully above the horizon, painting the trees in golden light, a blue jay landed on the porch railing, regarding Eleanor with intelligent curiosity. In the week since her transformation, the forest creatures had grown increasingly comfortable in her presence, recognizing her altered nature. The bird tilted its head, projecting a simple greeting that Eleanor received as clearly as spoken words. "Good morning to you, too," she replied with a smile, embracing this new day of her transformed existence, no longer merely human, but something the modern world had forgotten how to name.